Hey, welcome back to Cain Course World History. You know, I've talked about this before, but I have a brother, and in many cases in families, especially amongst brothers, there's often a sibling rivalry. Now, of course, I would say my brother is just a less cooler version of me, but there are a lot of similarities between both of us, and he, of course, would say that he's a better version of me. And it's funny how in such a relationship, little things often get blown into proportion and create arguments. Who was the better athlete in high school? Who's funnier? Yeah, the debates go on all the time. And this is something that's true in history as well. Of course, we have different examples of siblings that don't get along. But on a bigger level, we do have nations and states that are closely related in their origins, and of course, they don't get along, often thinking they should rule each other. And maybe the most famous example of this is one of the most famous rivalries in all of world history, the rivalry between France and Britain, or England. And that's our topic for today. Let's go. Historically, England and France are truly attached at the hip. Their origins go back again to the fall of the Roman Empire. We already unpacked in a previous video what happened in England, with the rise of the Anglo-Saxon kings, specifically Alfred the Great, as well as the incidents with the Danes and the formation of the Danelaw. And meanwhile, back on the mainland, we had the establishment of the Holy Roman Empire under the Carolingian dynasty, specifically the reign of Charlemagne. And that's where this story really takes off, and the two come together.
Remember, after Charlemagne's death in 814, the Carolingian Empire began to crumble, and in 843, Charlemagne's grandsons signed the Treaty of Verdun, which divided up that empire. The portion in orange was given to Lothair, one of Charlemagne's grandsons, and this became what we now know as France. There were actually several smaller French kingdoms in this region, including Normandy, but this truly became France as we know it. This truly happened in about 940 when Hugh Capet became king of the Franks. The ensuing Capetian dynasty would establish France as the most powerful kingdom in Europe at that time.
For 300 years, the Capetians ruled France and truly turned it into a power. Embraced feudalism and also had a good relationship with the church. In fact, it was argued that France was the church's true ally. Now, back on the island of England, England was truly united under one kingdom thanks to the efforts of Alfred the Great as well as his descendant Ethelred. And after a brief stint where the Danes truly ruled all of England under rulers like Canute the Great, a king known as Edward the Confessor brought back the English throne. And his rule was very effective. However, it was cut short when he died in 1066, and it left England with a number of different claims to the throne. Of course, there were individuals who were connected to the Anglo-Saxon side of things that believed in Anglo-Saxon truths. This included Edward's brother-in-law, Harold, who initially took the throne. However, remember, England has a large Danish population because of the Danelaw, and the Danes wanted somebody who was more connected to their heritage to rule. And ironically, there was the perfect person for that, a rich noble living in France, specifically in the state of Normandy.
Following the death of Edward the Confessor, England's throne now lay open, and William of Normandy, which was located in France, had a legitimate claim to the throne. This was due to William's Viking heritage and connection to the Danes, who had had so much power in Anglo-Saxon England.
William intended to take the throne for himself, and his army of Norman knights was one of the most effective in the world at this point in time. And he also had the support of a Danish army from a relative known as Harald Hardrada. I know there's two Harolds here, try not to get them confused. Together, they won a massive victory at the Battle of Stamford Bridge and pushed further into England, about ready to take the throne.
On Christmas Day, 1066, at the Battle of Hastings, William and his Norman army clashed with Harold and the Anglo-Saxon army. William and the Normans won a decisive victory, resulting in William earning the name Conqueror and becoming King of England, establishing now Norman rule in what was previously Anglo-Saxon England. This would change England forever, and because of the Norman heritage, create a clear relationship with France.
The Battle of Hastings in 1066 was an important turning point in world history and for England as well. Many historians agree that this is truly the event that created England as we know it and recognize it historically.
In everything, there is an echo of 1066. To be sure, William's victory at Hastings and the replacement of the Saxon aristocracy by a French-speaking ruling class gave a new direction to our history. Its first result was a much closer relationship with France and indeed with Rome. William's invasion had the approval of the Pope. Whatever there has been of smooth development in constitutional history also stems from the conquest. Third, the most enduring legacy is also the richest, our wonderful hybrid language and the golden treasury that is English literature. There are also visible reminders of the conquest, Norman churches, the Tower of London, and the majesty of Durham Cathedral, the Telegraph.
William certainly left a legacy as king, including bringing feudalism truly to England. He required all nobles to pledge allegiance to William first. William also kept an extensive record of all of the taxation and all of the people in England with something he called the Doomsday Book. He used the term doomsday because it was supposed to be as thorough and as relevant as a potential apocalypse would be. But the most important legacy that William leaves behind is this connection with France. Being a French Norman created this relationship between England and France. And Normandy itself, because of William's ties, was actually ruled by England. So England had territory on the island as well as on the French mainland. Now, of course, France believes that it owns Normandy. And herein lies the struggle between the two over who rules who. Now, there were a series of kings after William, but the most effective was probably Henry II.
When Henry II, who was a wealthy noble from France, inherited the throne in 1154, he establishes the House of the Plantagenets as the rulers of England. Henry further established Plantagenet control over England by creating English common law, a law system that applied to every English citizen. He also used traveling justices to enforce royal laws, much like Charlemagne had, and introduced England's first jury system.
Henry clearly wanted to be the most powerful person in all of Europe, and that obviously put him in conflict with the church, especially when Henry attempted to try clergy in court and increase taxes on the church.
Thomas Beckett, the Archbishop of Canterbury, and therefore the most powerful bishop in all of England, thought Henry was taking power from the church. 1174 knights of Henry took it upon themselves to murder Thomas Beckett and get revenge. While Henry denied having any involvement in the murder, he ceased his attempts to control the clergy as a response to make peace with the church.
You best not. You come at the church, you best not miss. You were outgunned and you were outmanned. You lose that battle 9 times out of 10. Did that go the way you thought it would? Nope. It's at this point that both England and France and the rest of Europe get involved in the Crusades, and we're going to need a whole nother video to unpack what happened there. Now, long story short, one of England's more powerful rulers, Richard I, or Richard the Lionheart, got caught up in the Third Crusade and was gone. And he also got taken hostage and swore fealty to the Holy Roman Empire. He just wasn't in position to rule, and that resulted in a new king.
With Richard off gallivanting on his crusade, John seized the throne in 1199. John seemed to be a much weaker ruler than his brother and was engaged in a power struggle with Pope Innocent III, and also faced growing insurrection within the English nobles.
But the biggest threat that John faced was the growth of France. Meanwhile, the Capetians had been continuing to grow, and France was becoming increasingly more powerful.
Meanwhile, in France, the new French king Philip II, or Philip Augustus, continued to expand France. Through new national tax, Philip was able to build France's economy as well as create a standing army. Philip also believed that the area of Normandy, which had since been ruled by England thanks to William, belonged to France itself.
Philip had been unable to defeat Richard in order to gain back Normandy, but with Richard distracted by the Crusades, he was now successful in war against the much weaker John. And he kind of swindled him in a few trade deals and negotiations that ended up giving Normandy and other British-ruled lands back to France. This was a humiliating event for John, and just another in a long list of blunders that left the English nobles increasingly upset with his rule.
In 1215, the wealthy English barons cornered John and forced him to make amends and give them more rights. In a document called the Magna Carta, or the Great Charter, the rights of the people were protected and also greatly limited the king's power. The Magna Carta limited the king's taxation power and also created due process of the law, meaning nobody could be imprisoned without being accused for crimes. Most importantly, the Magna Carta showed the rights that nobles and common people had and also showed that the law applies to the king. It also set a precedent for a ruling council of nobles who would check the king's power and provide guidance. This would later become known as Parliament.
With Normandy back in the hands of France, France under the Capetians continued to grow, especially under the reign of 2 important monarchs.
Arguably the most important and influential ruler in France was Saint Louis, or Louis IX. He focused on defending the church as well as the common people. He was truly a man of the people and one who believed in service and chivalry. Louis also expanded France and even ended serfdom, and in the process created a system of checks and balances that kept the kingdom running. His rule also created a strong sense of French patriotism. However, Louis's grandson, Philip IV, was a much more ruthless French ruler. In attempts to expand the power of the French king, he began taxing French clergy. This created a conflict with Pope Boniface VIII, who said this was not a power that Philip had.
Every other Pope Boniface, like almost every other pope, subscribed to the theory of the donation of Constantine, that God had set popes over kings and kingdoms. That's literally what the pope said. So as the conflict continues to escalate, it really gets out of hand when Philip sends a number of troops to kidnap Pope Boniface. And somewhere along the lines, Pope Boniface is accidentally killed. I don't know how that happens. I can't make this stuff up, people. Just like Henry II, of course, Philip IV denies any involvement in here. It's like Tom Cruise in Mission Impossible. The secretary can neither confirm nor deny anything that's going on in the IMF.
Following the death of Boniface, a new pope, Clement V, was elected pope. Clement, who is French, moved the papacy to the French city of Avignon, restoring a clear relationship between the French government and the church. The incident with the Pope caused Philip to search for more public support, so he formed the Estates General in 1302, which was a representational body of French nobles, which was meant, again, to check the king's power and allow for more participation in government.
Now, meanwhile, back in England, England was still reeling from the effects of John's kingship. And unfortunately for England, there would only be more drama.
King Edward I, or Edward Longshanks, was determined to bring back royal power to the house of the Plantagenets.
Edward is probably most famous for his depiction in the movie Braveheart. You know what I say to that? Toss it. I did make it, by the way. Because most of that movie is extremely inaccurate. However, it does depict Longshanks as a ruthless ruler who did attempt to maintain control of Scotland in a very violent fashion. Edward hoped that his successful reign would be continued by his son.
Longshanks' son, Edward II, was a much weaker ruler and very ineffective. Records say that rather than enjoying manly activities like jousting and hunting, Edward preferred to thatch and sow. Edward II's wife, Isabella of France, knew he was weak and challenged his rule. She was, let's say, dating another English guy and fled with him to France. Isabella returned with a large army and staged a coup that dethroned Edward II. Their son, Edward III, was arguably the most powerful and effective ruler in the Plantagenet household. During his reign, he expanded Parliament and effectively defended English borders.
Edward III was successful in defeating Scotland, something both his father and grandfather were unable to do. And then he turned his attention to regaining Normandy, and actually all of France. Edward III declares himself the rightful heir to the French throne, something he actually probably didn't have a legitimate claim to. And as you can imagine, that is going to spark a major conflict between England and France. In the meantime, the story of England and France really is like the story of two brothers. In so many ways, they're similar. They have similar origins, and they run their countries in very similar fashions. But yet there's this constant struggle for superiority. Who gets to rule who? Who's better? Who does the church love more? It makes you wonder, what could have happened if they put their differences aside? Could you have a united England and France? Well, history would tell us probably not. There's just too much ego there. So unlike the biblical story of Jacob and Esau, which is also a story of sibling rivalry and a story of sibling ego, there isn't going to be this opportunity for England and France to make up. They're never really going to come together and truly be the brothers that they seem to be. And yet, in the meantime, Edward III's claim of the French throne is going to be a spark that ignites a massive conflict. One that will literally last 100 years. But that's a story for another day. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.